Now, something that if you have the opportunity to hunt this type of a herd balance in this type of deer habitat, then you're going to have an enjoyable hunt. And this will relate to anybody. It really doesn't matter. And what I'm talking about is quality deer management. Quality deer management has been around for a long time. I believe it originated in the 90s over in the Buffalo County area, maybe in the late 80s, where outfitters and guides were looking for a more herd balanced structure with an older age class of bucks. They set minimums for shooting bucks, and that minimum created better sex ratios, and then hopefully populations maintain and balance of the habitat. There's a lot of confusion concerning QDM. Back in 2004, I was given the Al Brothers Deer Manager of the Year Award by the QDMA, National QDMA. And they gave that to one individual, and it happened to be about 40,000 members that year. And they gave that to me even though I'd never shot a doe on my property in 5 years. And I actually wrote about that, and that was in the March issue of 2004 in the Quality Whitetails magazine put out by the QDMA. In fact, behind Dylan right over there is my wife. At the time, she actually framed that article for me. That was my first article published in Quality Whitetails. So that was pretty cool. What bottom line is, people in the UP of Michigan, that was in the UP of Michigan, thought that, and it was very erroneously reported, that if we had QDM in that area, there'd be a reduction in does, and that simply was not true. In fact, it was so untrue that the QDMA gave me that award this year, even though I showed a chronological order of events over a 5-year period of the herd buildup on the land. So I built the herd and didn't shoot any does. But again, it goes back to these 3 founding biological principles of QDM that I'm going to discuss. And I've always worked towards that. I was a QDM member in the late 90s. I believed in the concept, the biological foundation of QDM. And what I've found is even the Quality Deer Management Association, now the NDA, it seemed like the more success that they've had, the more they revolved around how to help the small landowner. I think at one time they did a survey, and the average landowner or private landowner that they had as a member had about 100, 110 acres. And I'm not sure that's really changed that much today. The more an entity or a company focuses on helping their membership or helping whitetail hunters as a whole, the more successful they are. And I think the NDA would not disagree with that. They have the tools and resources, focus on those small landowners, and everything works out because there's this biological basis. The key is trying to find each one of these right here. There's also a lot of misunderstanding that with QDM you have to have big bucks. Well, number 5, it's all relative down here. So it really depends on the herd potential area, the number of hunters, and that's the cool thing about QDM. A lot of people confuse it with trophy deer management, where you have a limited number of does for possibly the same number or more bucks. Those bucks you try to bring to a trophy status and age, whether that's 6, 7, 5 years old, whatever it might be, and you're shooting them in the cream of the crop. A lot of times that can be fenced operations or not, just large acreage, highly controlled, but completely different than QDM, where you're looking just for more balance in a typical age structure. We'll talk about that. Number 1, these are the 3 founding principles of QDM. These first 3 right here. That's what QDM is. The biological basis, that's it. Buck age structure, adequate buck age structure. In an area in central Michigan, central Pennsylvania, maybe a northern Ohio setting where there's not a lot of cover, that might mean that a 2 or 3 year old buck is the king of the woods, the king of the habitat. Now in an area in Ohio, or in southern Ohio, over into southern Indiana, Illinois, into Iowa, and certainly Kansas, that might mean that you're looking for 4, 5, and 6 year old bucks, even 6 and 7 year old bucks. I have a friend out in Iowa, Kansas area, Nebraska, previous client of mine, Corey. He's typically harvesting his bucks and shooting them at the prime age of 5, 6, 7 years old, what he thinks is going to be that best antler, because he can, because there's not a lot of hunters, because you can wait till they get that old. But buck age structure, you're just trying to do your best for the land that you have, and that's the way I've approached it. It doesn't matter if you have 10 people that hunt on 80 acres or you have 1. The whole point is you're just trying to do your best based on the habitat and conditions. That means not only saying we're going to pass up this type of buck or this age of buck or this spread of buck. You know, there's lots of different rules for doing that, or ways you can do that, and maybe let young people shoot whatever they want, older people, who cares? You know, whatever you come up with as a group. But you're just trying to do the best that you can. A lot of that boils down to not just a guideline, but actual how you hunt the land. because that's the lowest hole in the bucket. So many people say, I'm going to shoot a 4-year-old buck, but they've never even seen a 3-year-old buck on their land. It's great to set realistic expectations and goals, and that directly applies to buck age structure. You're trying to attract bucks, hold bucks, advance them to the next age class, shoot them when they're prime in your area. Prime might be a 2-year-old, it might be a 7-year-old. It's all relative to the size of the parcels, neighbors, number of deer, and location that you're at. Sex ratios, what's kind of interesting, if you're actually attracting, holding bucks throughout the season, protecting some of the young bucks, advancing them to the next age class, if you're working on number 3, where you're keeping the population in balance with the habitat, then guess what? You're going to have good sex ratios. I hear people say, oh, our sex ratios, there's 20 does for every buck. Folks, that's impossible, because half of every fawn that's born is a buck. I believe that bucks actually outnumber does 51% to 49%, but who cares? The bottom line is half of all those bucks, or half of all those fawns are bucks, so it's impossible to have a lot of the bad sex ratios of people, like 9, 10 does to 1. That means you didn't have any fawns that year, basically. It's really impossible to happen. But guarantee, if you're working on how you hunt, you're working on your habitat, your deer hunting, you're working on promoting bucks to the next age class, you're gonna have great sex ratios. And typically that would be more like 2.5 to 3, 3.2, 3.5. I think some of the scientists have done the numbers, and it's almost impossible to have only 4 does for only 1 buck. That's a very poor ratio in most areas, and that doesn't happen. I think the average is more like around 3. What I see though is when you manage the property well with hunting, you're advancing bucks in the next age class, you're not spooking them. Even on 40 acres, 80 acres, you can be the herd influencer in the area. And what's really interesting, you might have a core group of 10, 15, 18 does and fawns that are hitting your food plots and your property on a daily basis. But not uncommon over the course of the season, we've had our 30 acres in Wisconsin that we hunt of cover. It's about 40 acres with fields, and we have 2.25 acre of food plots. Not uncommon for us to, on one mock scrape, get pictures of 30 to 35 different bucks throughout the course of the entire season. Now, only a portion of those are there around the whole time. A strong portion are just there for 1 or 2, 5 pictures. And then we have some that are here and there depending on the week. So you're looking at bucks from a large area, and it's pretty cool. If you're doing it right, you can take all those bucks from a large area and have them daylight focus on your land, even a small parcel, so that you can actually be the true herd influencer. Population and balance with the habitat. I can tell you right now, if you're focusing on summer food and great summer habitat and you're hunting poorly, you're going to have a ton of does and fawns on your property, and your population is going to be way out of balance. And what's interesting, your property is going to be way out of balance, but someone else a mile away is going to have the bucks. And those bucks are going to come through during the rut, and that's about it. So you have a chance that during the rut, maybe opening day of gun season when they're beginning push, maybe you have great food in December and they're there, but you're going to have very limited times where you're actually targeting those bucks and you're not a herd influencer. Bottom line is, if you're trying to maintain those deer in population with the habitat, that population and balance with the habitat, you're working on reducing the number of summer does and fawns, increasing your deer herd during November, December. Who cares where your property's at in August and September over a census? Those deer are going to be gone. That represents a pivot point. You need to gauge yourself, even as a QDM advocate, how well you're doing in October, November, December, not July, August, September. That doesn't mean anything. So what I find is, if you're doing well, what's cool is in late season, maybe early season, youth seasons, great time to target your does. You're targeting does that aren't there during the summer months because you're not promoting them. They're shifting over. What does that do? That allows a lot of those does to go over to your neighbors. You're sharing doe populations and fawn populations. That means those does are exposed to other hunting pressure. I go to a lot of properties, they have a really hard time maintaining the number of does that they have on their land. They can't shoot enough. They don't have enough tags. And really that goes back to, if you have that many deer in the area, the culprit almost 100% of the time is heavy summer food sources on their land or directly adjacent to the land. Very hard to work and create a quality herd. But if you are actually creating a balance in the population, and balance meaning it's not 1 to 1, you're looking at 2 to 3 does for every buck. But you can really stick an unfair number of bucks on your land, even with 40 acres, and that's what I teach my clients to do and talk about on this channel all the time. If you have populations in balance with the habitat, you're passing up bucks, you're holding bucks during daylight hours, you're not creating a nocturnal herd, guess what? Your sex ratios fall right in line. These 3 work together to build a great herd. What's interesting, public land. A lot of public land holdings have a much greater and better QDM herd than private land. Private landowners, we as people mess it up a lot. What's different on public land is there's not a lot of deer. You know, if a buck is wise, he can escape sloppy hunting pressure. But a lot of times that hunting pressure is going to capitalize on young bucks and does. What does that do? When those bucks get to an older age, they're there. So what I find on a lot of big, giant public land tracts, and I could name a few, but I don't want to see you there, see you at my parking spot. So when I go in to hunt public land, those locations I'm at, I'm seeing, if I see 7 deer that go by, I'm probably going to see 1 buck that's smaller and then a decent sized buck. Let alone if I see 20, 30 deer go by in a 3 or 4 day period, like when I'm out on public land in Pennsylvania, I'm going to see a nice shooter, a real nice shooter to shoot that's 3, 4, 5 years old on public land. And you're finding those better herds because people are gleaning off the does, they're gleaning off those younger bucks. If you have enough space, those older bucks are going to there. Sometimes those bucks die of old age in those big, giant public land tracts. Even in Michigan, believe it or not, I can't tell you how many clients I have that are adjacent to public land where the best bucks come off that public land because they're unpressured. And the outside, they're thinning out that deer herd. Great sex ratio. So a lot of times, public land in general has a better QDM herd than private land. And it's not because people are doing a better management job. It's just the lowest hole in the bucket. People are shooting a lot of deer. There's remote areas where people don't want to walk into. They're not hunting properly. And so it ends up giving a great balance of these 3 biological basics of QDM. Private land's tough. I go to a lot of private land. The more you do, the more does and fawns you have. The more does and fawns you have, the more you're out of balance. The more you're out of balance, the fewer bucks that you can expect to be on your land during the daylight hours, let alone during the rut. If you have a lot of does and fawns in September and October, guess what? You're not going to have a lot of mature bucks. You might have a few that come through during the rut, but if you have more of a balance going into September and October, sticking to those QDM principles right there, then you're actually going to have more bucks here in the rut too, and for most of the entire season. So really looking at how can I increase my buck age structure? How can I work on sex ratios? How can I work on that population in balance with the habitat? And you'll find that they all work together to create a great herd, a QDM herd, which is not trophy and it's not traditional deer management either, where you just sell as many tags as you can in a state and hope people are happy. I had a NRC commissioner up in the UP of Michigan one time tell me it wasn't necessarily about what was best for the herd or hunter. It was listening to the loudest voice and just doing what the public wanted. Traditional deer management. QDM is in between, and then there's trophy deer management, which is a lot different. Bottom line, what's QDM in your area? It's all relative. It really is. If you're in a high pressure area with lots of hunters, small parcels, not great habitat, you might be looking at a top end age structure of 2 to 3 year old buck. That doesn't mean you can't still have good sex ratios and that you don't have a population maintained in balance with the habitat. It just means your buck age structure is going to be a little bit lower, and it's going to be appropriate for your area. That might be a lot lower than a fantasy land state on private land somewhere, where you can actually influence the herd, watch deer at an older age. But your bottom line is you're just trying to do what's best in your area. And that's why I've loved QDM for such a long time. I was disappointed they changed the name from the Quality Deer Management Association because I thought that accurately reflected actually the QDM basics and that biological basis of QDM within the name. Now it's National Deer Alliance, which is a great name. It's a great organization still, but really the success of that organization, any entity that's trying to help you as a deer hunter, whether it's on public or private land, is going to get back to these basics right here. That does not mean you shoot at every doe. That does not mean you're looking at harvesting bucks that are 6, 7 years old. Just means that you're looking for balance. And wow, when you find balance, whether you're experiencing a QDM herd on private or public land, you're going to find a great hunt. You're going to find more rubbing, more scraping, more chasing, more fighting. You're going to get to experience the typical rut that people enjoy in those typical deer numbers and deer behavior that you all dream about, maybe see on TV. That's what's crazy. That's why there's so many people traveling from high pressure states to hunt states that have good QDM herds on public land in locations that seem far, far away. But depending on where you live, it's really not that far away. And even in Michigan, even in Pennsylvania, I find great public land, even though there's a lot of hunters, some of the highest hunter numbers in the state. You know what's cool is we're looking at a buck like this, Venti. This is when he was 2.5 years old. He's a really cool buck. We found a video of him from, today, Dylan and I, as a 4-year-old buck. You know, some would say in a trophy management area, let's see what this buck, he was 14 points as a 2-year-old. He was 21 points last year. He's pushing that 20-point range this year. Someone would say, you know what, we need to see what he's at 5 and 6. Well, we'll see what he's at when he's 5 or 6 years old in this area if we don't kill him this year and if someone else doesn't. But we're going to target him. He's 4, he's mature. It's like a ripe fruit on the apple tree. He's ready to be picked. That's QDM. Again, it's all relative. If I was in a fantasy land state like Iowa, maybe Kansas, maybe portions of Missouri, maybe portions of Western Illinois, some of those big buck areas, traditional big buck areas, I might want to wait till he's 5 or 6. But again, QDM, look for that balance. Doesn't mean you're hunting 5, 6-year-old bucks. It just means you're trying to do the best with what you have. And that's what every one of my strategies boil back to on this channel, on my website. If you like to read more than you like to listen or watch videos, maybe get sick of my voice, check out my website. Over 600 whitetail articles on there, strategy whitetail articles. I have my books, I have my web classes. Bottom line, enjoy the hunt, find balance, and you're going to find a great hunt and a great herd, and maybe even be the herd influencer this fall. Well, I'm real excited, folks. I appreciate you watching this video, but my next web class, how to plant food plots, how to design your food plot program, is out. And it really goes through a step-by-step process for not only how to plant your food plots, but why you should plant them, where you should plant them, what you should plant, how you should create them. There's a lot of different modules. Ends up about 30 videos all together. I urge you to check that out. We're out here completing our food plot work today, and we do that in a pretty strict pattern so we can find success this fall. Food plots shouldn't be a guessing game. Take the guesswork out of food plots and food plots planting, and check out the web classes. I have my how to design your whitetail property, the food plots for the next web class in the series, and I hope you enjoy it. I hope you check it out, and let me know what you think if you end up purchasing that, and I think you'd be well pleased that you did.